Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I'm Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Ellen Scheller-Wolf as our distinguished guest for today's episode. Before we begin, let me introduce our guest for today's episode. Dr. Ellen Scheller-Wolf is a Richard M. Cyert Professor of Operations Management at the Tepper School of Business, Carnegie Mellon University, where he has been a faculty member since 1996. A scholar who bridges the deeply theoretical and the urgently practical, his work spans scoetic processes, multi-server queuing theory, and real-world applications in energy, sustainability, healthcare, and supply chain. Dr. Ellen holds a BA in art history and a BS in mathematics and computational science from Stanford University, and earned both his MS and PhD in operations research from Columbia University, a rare combination that reflects his ability to see problems through multiple lenses. He currently serves as the chair of the PhD committee overseeing the Tepper School's doctoral program and sits on the editorial boards of several leading academic journals. His research portfolio is remarkably wide, from discrete time inventory theory and perishable goods logistics to staffing models for emergency departments, organ transplantation systems, and renewable energy optimization. Whether designing smarter call centers or rethinking how hospitals manage blood product inventory, Professor Allen's work is driven by a singular goal: making complex systems work better for people. In the classroom, he brings the same range, teaching sustainable operations at MBA and undergraduate levels, Six Sigma, and dynamic programming. In today's episode, Professor Ellen Scheller-Wolf joins us to explore the key insights from his research. When does partial priority improve revenue? The research was conceived alongside Dr. Mor Harchol-Balter, Professor of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University, and Zhouzi Li, a current doctoral research assistant at CMU. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ellen Scheller-Wolf to the conversation. Professor Ellen, it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor, and that was a lovely introduction.
Thank you. Professor, could you give our audience a sense of what sparked this study? Was there a specific moment or real-world observation that made Dr. Mor Harchol-Balter question whether we have been approaching priority queues all wrong? And how did the collaboration between you and Zhouzi Li come together?
Thank you. Moore and I are both queuing theorists, and we've done many, many papers together because our interests are close and we work well together. And you sort of wonder about these things that you take for granted in almost every system you see in the world. And all of the math that's done is a strict priority, high priority before low priority. And so Moore and I had wondered in the past, I think she probably wondered first, can we do better if we randomize the priority? And this is sort of something that we talked about for a while and kicked around, and it seemed like it should be true. Ultimately, she proposed it to one of her doctoral students, Zhouzi, and that sort of the um, initiated the project. And so it was less observing what does exist and more observing what it doesn't exist and wondering why.
Professor, the paper reveals something quite surprising. Partial priority only outperforms strict priority when both a price cap and waiting time limit are simultaneously in place. Most people would assume more flexibility always helps. How do you explain this result in a plain English?
So yeah, I mean, that is sort of surprising to us because you expect flexibility to help. I want to be clear that flexibility doesn't hurt here. It just doesn't really help. And the issue is because we have two types of customers, you have the high priority customers and the low priority customers. And you should think of the high priority customers as willing to pay more for the service. We take the case here where the low priority won't pay anything, but that's just immaterial. In the way service systems work is if something is more valuable to a certain class of people, you sell it to them for more. And so it turns out that the answer is I want to give priority to the high priority customers, the high value customers, because they're willing to pay more. That just makes more money and is more socially efficient. And that turns out to be a really powerful principle because you don't want any flexibility. You just want to give them the most priority. And then it turns out, well, if I say, well, so you want to give them the most priority and charge them as much as you can to make them, at which point they're indifferent. And then you say, okay, well, maybe I can't charge them as much as I can. I'm going to put a price cap on. Surprisingly, there it still continues to be optimal to give them full priority because you still, that principle of selling your good to the person who will pay the most for it is really powerful. And so you want to still give them priority. And then at some point you say, well, okay, what if there's a price cap and a maximum waiting point? And there I've sort of closed off the flexibility. And then partial priority helps to sort of give you a little more wiggle room.
Professor, Disney World's lighting lens serves as a central real-world example woven throughout the study. Walking through a Disney park, the queues there feel like a living operations research problem. What observations from that environment shape this research? And what might the causal visitor easily overlook?
So that's a great question. So what you realize is that I mean, back when I was young and would go to amusement parks, they would only have one line, right? And then as you get older, you see, okay, there's a second line and people can buy the lightning pass and they've got all these principles. And you realize somebody at some point realized we can sell the same thing, which is the ability to ride on these rides. But if we sell it at different prices, we can make more money. And so that sort of inspires the way of doing this, but that then makes the problem more complicated because how should I sell it? How should I give people priority? And it also made us think that, well, if you just let the high priority people through, the low priority people are going to get really mad, right? You don't like seeing people cut in front of it. We're kind of getting used to it, but that still upsets people. And so then we sort of got into the idea of how to balance it. So the idea of selling the same thing to different people, distinguishing by weight, but having to keep it sort of in balance, influence this. And then I think if I'm thinking about Disney, the thing about weighting that people may overlook or they notice but don't notice is waiting gets really expensive for people. People value their time. And Disney is one of the greatest organizations at making people forget that they're waiting. You know, they've got lines, the lines zig in and out of enclosures, so you can't really see how long the line is because that's sort of upsetting. And then on the way, they have displays and animatronics and characters because they recognize waiting is expensive. And so they try to make the waiting as least expensive as possible by giving you distractions. And so fundamentally, that's the mechanism underneath it. Waiting is expensive. How can we try to limit that?
Professor, the authors introduce what they call the hybrid queue policy, a probabilistic approach that essentially uses a coin flip mechanism to determine which customer gets served next. How does this differ from how most service systems actually work today? And is practically implementable?
So the vast majority of systems today tend to be strict priority. You're higher priority, I'm lower priority. If we're there at the same time and a slot opens up, it goes to you. That's simple. And also people sort of know what to expect. So that's definitely the majority. Um, you do see some partial priority at Disneyland. You'll see it in immigration where they'll have high priority lines and low priority lines, and they take people from a mixture. So it can be done. Obviously, you don't have people flipping coins. That's not what's happening, but it's very simple to have a monitor generate random numbers. And basically, you're not even seeing the numbers. You just push the button when you have another person, and it'll tell you which line to take from. And so then you can say, well, 85% of the time, take from the high priority. And every time I push a button, there's an 85% chance it comes up high. So it's definitely implementable now, but we're not going to be flipping coins or rolling dice.
Professor, at its core, The model is firmly focused on maximizing revenue for the service provider. But there is a fairness dimension here. Regular customers waiting longer so premium, customers can jump the line. How do you reconcile the math of revenue optimization with the ethics of waiting?
So that's a very central question. And so um, there is this idea that sort of everybody should wait the same amount. And if that's what you believe, you get in one line and you serve people first come, first serve. And that's what happens if you go to the post office or the supermarket, maybe. Um, the other branch says that if you have different people for whom waiting is more or less painful, um, then in some sense it's fair to equate the pain. And if it's 10 times more painful for you to wait than me, because you've got to get your wife to the hospital or something, or get back to your kids, maybe I should wait 10 times longer, and that sort of equates the pain or the cost. And that then is sort of the fairness principle underlying our model and other models of what we call strategic queuing, which is if it's more painful for someone to wait, which we measure through a cost measure, it's just sort of more efficient for the system to make them wait less. It's sort of a different measure of fairness, but I will say clearly that it sort of makes one uncomfortable sometime to think, well, when you're very small, cutting in line doesn't seem right. And so we're letting people cut in line. And I can argue mathematically or economically or from social welfare that's right. But yeah, it still doesn't always make me feel completely comfortable.
Professor, the paper shows that Disney's $30 cap on lightning lane passes is actually a key ingredient that makes partial priority outperform strict priority. So counterintuitively, constraining the price is what unlocks more revenue. How does that logic work?
So good. So I want to make a distinction here. Um, Constraining the price doesn't make the seller better off. Okay. So if I unconstrain the price, the seller will make the most revenue. Okay. What happens is they can make that most revenue without partial priority. What happens is once I want them to be able to use partial priority effectively, they need their options constrained. If they're completely free, they'll give all the priority to the high customers, extract all of their revenue, and make the most money. And so, what you need to do to make partial priority useful is to sort of constrain the people who are selling the goods, say you can't charge too much, you can't make people wait too long, and then they need that freedom of partial priority to sort of unlock them from the box.
Professor, under realistic Disney World parameters, the model predicts a 53% revenue improvement, jumping from $2,400 to $3,600 per attraction per day, simply by switching to a partial priority policy. Why hasn't Disney already done this?
So there are a couple reasons, possibly. Of course, I don't know because I'm not running Disneyland. Um, but the thought would be that there are factors in the model that we haven't captured. And so by that, I mean, it gets back to sort of what you talked about before. There's a fairness question. And so Disney already gets some amount of static or grief for having the priority. People like the Lightning Pass, but other people think that no, they're just extracting more money and they hate waiting in line. In some sense, if they started to randomize, um, so either they haven't thought of it or they're not willing to change, or there are other costs we're not capturing, which would be a cost of reduced happiness for both sets of customers. Because you might have people who are paying for the line, and then they get in front, and then you're flipping a coin, and they happen to get very unlucky, and they wait behind five or six other people. Then they're going to think, why the heck am I waiting? And so that is then going to hurt their sales that way. The other thing I'll mention is we are talking all about average wait times. There are two dimensions of waiting. There's the average and the variation. And people can get used to an average, but it's harder to get used to a variation when you call your doctor and you're put on hold. And if you know I'm going to have to hold for 3 minutes, okay, I'll go on hold, I'll go get myself some water, and I'll come back. But if it might be 30 seconds or it might be 5 minutes, then it's more painful because then I don't know what to do and I'm going to miss it. And so flipping coins would add variability, and they may just not want that because they may feel like that's going to upset people.
Professor, the entire model is set in the unobservable queue setting, where customers can't see the line before deciding whether to pay for priority. How does the invisibility fundamentally change the economics of the problem?
So it changes it fundamentally. Um, Let me back up. So there are observable and unobservable systems. And observable systems is you can see what the line is, like you're going out to dinner and you can see how many people are waiting, or you're checking at the supermarket and you can count, I'm the sixth in line. Um, Unobservable are where you can't see the people in front of you. In Disneyland, that would be because when I buy the Lightning Pass, it's 3 days before I go. I'm not paying on the spot, and I'm guessing how many people are going to wait in front of me. Um, if the queue is observable, and if you let people have rationality and decision-making power, it makes the problem really complicated. In the unobservable sense, I think, okay, the average is 12 minutes, I'm going to make my decision. And for everyone who looks like me, it's 12 minutes. So we all make the same decision. If it's observable, even though the average is 12 minutes, when I arrive, it might be 5 minutes. And then when you arrive, it might be 6 minutes. And then we're going to make different decisions. We've got different calculuses because we're facing different problems, which means if we want to do things optimally, I need to offer a price sort of to every person differently. So it just makes the problem much more complicated because you're giving more power to the customers so they can make better decisions. And that's often, frankly, not always, but often not in the best interest of the seller.
Professor, the research introduces a visually striking concept called the achievability region, almost like a map of all possible waiting line time outcomes. Can you describe what that map look like and why the shape of strict priorities region is described as a tornado?
Yeah, and so if I decide you're high priority, class one, and I'm low priority in class two, then you're always going to go in front of me. Okay, and let's just assume we're in strict priority world, we're not partialing. And so that means your class's weighting is always going to be less than mine. Okay. Um, and let's assume that the arrival rate is teeny, teeny, tiny. Okay. Then if the arrival rate is so small, our weights are going to both be really close to zero. And so that's really the tip of the tornado, which is very, very thin. Okay. But now let's say your weight can be up to 1,000, my weight can be up to 1,000. Then we've got a lot more people in the system, and we have much more dynamism um, as far as the different ranges of values we can get. Okay. And so that explains why as we go further out, it gets fatter up above. And then the other thing is because you're always going to wait shorter than me, the curve is going to sort of bend to make it better for you because you've got high priority and I don't. And then finally, queuing systems are inherently nonlinear for reasons I don't want to go into. So you get a bending curve. So we get two bending curves and that show the best and worst case scenario, even though you're in front of me, and we fill that region up and it looks like a tornado.
Professor, a well-established finding in this research is that when there is no price cap or waiting time constraint, strict priority is always the optimal policy. So under what real-world conditions should managers stick with strict priority and not bother with partial priority at all?
So generally, you're going to have to think about partial priority only in situations where, as a manager, where you're constrained by law or by norms, a social good. Okay. And so in Disneyland, there's certainly no law. They can make people wait as long as they want, but they're subject to social pressure. If people have to wait too long, they get very unhappy. And that's going to be a problem. And so they have to keep the waiting time down. And likewise, if they charge too much money, they're subject to social pressure. So that constrains them. And so when you find yourself constrained, you might want the flexibility. Similarly, in airports, you might want to sell the, fast pass to people, the pre-check, but everybody's got to get through the airport. And if people are waiting 5 hours in the airport, it gets very painful and the government's going to get involved. So you're going to need to sort of keep things running within a reasonable range, but also want to extract some of the value from high priority customers. And that's when it makes sense to think about partial priority, because you need to balance not just making more money, but also serving your customers in a way that keeps the general public and or the government reasonably satisfied.
Professor Ellen, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. The paper closes by noting that while the two-queue problem has been solved, the multi-queue, multi-priority level scenario remains an open challenge for future research. What is the hardest part of this extending work further, and what surprising results might emerge from that exploration?
So this is actually a fairly common thing you bump into in queuing theory or other operations research, where one class is easy, two classes is hard, and once you get to three, it might become extremely hard. And that's because if it's you and I, and you're high priority and I'm low priority, we're done. Okay. But now if we bring my daughter into this situation, I need a relationship between your waiting time and my waiting time, between your waiting time and her waiting time, between her waiting time and my waiting time. And so I need to try to enforce all of these relationships. And so it might be possible that the problem just becomes infeasible because there's so many more constraints to satisfy. And if you think about it, the number of constraints doesn't go up by one, it goes up geometrically. If it's you and me, it's one constraint. If it's you, me, and her, it's three constraints. If it's four people, it's even more constraints. And so the problem just gets much more complicated. And some things are possible in 2 dimensions, a plane, but become infeasible in 3 dimensions just because there's many more constraints and much more space to explore.
Thank you, Professor Ellen Scheller-Wolf, for a truly eye-opening conversation. What makes this research truly compelling is that it reminds us the seemingly mundane act of waiting in a line is, at its heart, a deeply strategic problem, one that touches pricing, fairness, and human behavior all at once. For our listeners at Business Talk, we hope this episode adds a new lens to how you think about service design and operations. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode of Business Talk very soon. Thank you, Professor Ellen, for sharing your time and this fascinating research with us today. We're equally grateful to Dr. Mor Harchol-Balter and Dr. Zhouzi Li for their contributions in bringing such valuable work from the academic world to a broader audience. This has been a truly enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.